Today I have Joshua Erickson back on the podcast to continue our series on the Jewish calendar and holidays. Now, if you remember, Joshua and I have had a few conversations up to this point. If you haven't listened to any of our prior conversations, I would strongly encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes first. They are episodes number 15, 27, 28, 30, and 40. The reason for this is that they all kind of build on each other. On this episode, we have a conversation about Purim. We talk about the biblical story behind the celebration, the deeper meanings of the story, and how it shows us that even when we don't think God is around, He's always there. And finally, and how the holiday is kept today. That's next on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. So I want to take just a few moments here and just say thank you for listening. I can never tell you how much it means to me that you spend your time here with me. Now, on top of that, last year I received donations that helped me upgrade the audio, equipment, and software. This year I want to do the same thing for video. Now, if you want to help out and make a donation, you can do that by going to MormonRenegade.com and making a donation there. Also, check out the Mormon Renegade supply store at MormonRenegade.com and pick up some merch. Now, if you can't do any of those, I completely understand. It's not like it's been a banner year necessarily for our finances. So maybe just keep the podcast in your prayers. Finally, as I've started to do more video, there's a YouTube channel up for the podcast. But just between you and me, I ain't going to be there very long because I have a feeling I'm going to get kicked off. So to stay one step ahead of that, I've made a channel on Rumble. So head on over to Rumble, look up the Mormon Renegade podcast channel there, and crush that like and subscribe button. Thank you. I have been very careful on this podcast to only advertise for items that I feel will add value and purpose in your life. That said, I've discovered a book that I really believe should be in every Mormon's library. The book is called Beneath Sheep's Clothing. In this book, the author, Julie Beeling, breaks down the communist infiltration into our schools, institutions, and perhaps even most distressing, our churches. The book backs up its claims with well-cited sources so you can go do the research yourself. This book will allow you to see the communist tactics and gives you the tools on how to combat this insidious movement in America. Julie is right now trying to raise money to make the book into a documentary, and I can't recommend donating to this cause strongly enough. So head over to MormonRenegade.com and you can find the link to buy the book and donate to the documentary in this episode page, or scroll down to the very bottom of the landing page at MormonRenegade.com to find a link to buy the book.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.
Well, Joshua, it's good to have you back, man.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we're on Purim now?
That's right, Purim.
Awesome. Okay. Give the backstory. What is Purim?
Oh, okay. So Purim is the feast of Esther, also known as the Feast of Esther. Purim actually is a Hebrew word. Purim means lots, as in like casting lots.
Okay.
And so it's called that because of the things that happen in the story. So just kind of the brief overview of the story, and we'll get into maybe some specifics, but this story happens when the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, is in captivity in Babylon and then in Persia. Right, there's the king. The king is Achashverosh, and he has a queen, Vashti, and she displeases him, and he gets rid of her, looks for a new queen, and Esther is comes up as one of the possibilities.
So is this king an Israelite? Is he Israeli?
No, he is Persian.
Okay.
Yep. So you know the story probably, or
right.
Many people do, but just to keep going here, Esther keeps her Jewish identity secret, and eventually she is chosen to be queen. But there's some intrigue on the side. There's the bad guy in the story whose name is Haman, and he has a plan to destroy all the Jews because he's been offended by Mordecai, who is Esther's cousin. And this plan that he has to destroy all the Jews comes to light, and Esther, petitions the king, but it's a dangerous thing to do. But she petitions the king to get the the decree reversed, and they're not able to do that, but they do come up with a solution, and the Jews are saved, and Haman gets killed, and Mordecai gets exalted, and then they have a big party to celebrate, their liberation, their salvation from destruction.
That's one of those stories that I feel like probably doesn't get enough run, right? Because oftentimes you hear, you get into biblical stuff and, women are quote unquote second-class citizens. And here it's a woman that saves the entire nation.
Oh, yeah. Queen Esther is the hero. Mordecai as well. They are, but, Esther has an enormous role to play. And, I think it doesn't get that much attention. And there's actually good reasons for that. There's the story of Esther, the book of Esther, is a very complex book, actually. And there are a lot of themes woven through the book, but one of them is hidden things.
Okay.
So it might be surprising to, even people who have read it might be surprised to realize that the book of Esther is the only book in the entire canon of Scripture that does not mention God.
Really?
He is completely anonymous and hidden in the book of Esther. So there's no prophets, there's no visions, there's no miracles. No one even says a prayer.
Huh.
So that's not the only hidden thing. There are other hidden things too, like Esther's identity. She keeps herself hidden. Like the plans of Haman, he keeps those hidden. There's a secret plot to kill the king, and there's all these kind of secret things that eventually all come to light. And that's one of the themes is there's these hidden things that eventually come to light. And one of the ways that Purim is celebrated is by wearing disguises or costumes. Okay. So it's a costume party.
Nice.
Yep. So everyone comes, dressed up, and so that's fun. Whenever we celebrate it, we do that.
Nice.
Yeah. So Esther's in disguise, and even God's in disguise in the book, which is another one of the kind of amazing things about the story of Esther is this idea that God is manifested in the lives of these people through coincidences, essentially. That there's no miracles, like I said. There's no miracles. There's nothing that you could point at as a supernatural intervention that God makes in the outcome. And yet, when you look at the entire string of events, the likelihood of having that series of outcomes end up in the favor of the Jews just makes it undeniable that, yes, God was there behind the scenes, so to speak, pulling strings. And so that's kind of one of the take-home messages, I guess, is that even if it seems like
God's not around,
if you're not hearing God's voice, you're not seeing miracles, like he is still there, pulling strings behind the scenes, and he has his purposes and his timing for revealing himself, but he's not inactive. He just has plans that he's working out. So that's an important thing.
Yeah, that's a huge takeaway. I don't know how many times I know in my life I've looked up and just been like, "Where are you?
Yeah,
where are you?" And I suppose that's the wisdom in the part of the wisdom in the book, right? In that particular book is
very
that
wise.
You don't see him, you don't hear from him, but he's there.
Yeah, even I think of the one of the letters of Joseph Smith. I can't remember, section 120 or 121 around there.
Yeah, when he's in Liberty Jail.
Yeah, how long shall the pavilion cover? I can't remember how long will you be hiding?
Right.
Oh God, like, where are you? This is Joseph, who's just has like this stream of
He saw them, right?
stream of miraculous heavenly visitations and things, being frustrated for this moment of silence, So, there's been longer moments of silence, There have been centuries of silence, but the story of Esther kind of just demonstrates that even in those apparent moments of silence, or even centuries of silence, that God's still orchestrating things behind the scenes. So
I think we all have that dark night of the soul at some point, right? Where just everything's gone to hell and we can't seem to figure it out, and we all have that moment. And I think when we see heroes like that struggle with that idea, I think that can only serve to bolster our faith. Right? Is that even if our spiritual heroes on occasion say, "Where are you, God?" I think that allows us to have a little bit of grace with ourselves when we look back and go, "Wow, maybe I didn't handle that right." And rather than beat ourselves up, it gives us the opportunity to reflect and grow a little more.
Yeah, there's some humility there. So Purim is a biblical holiday. Obviously, it's in the book of Esther, but it is one of those holidays that you could appropriately call Jewish. So the other holidays, Passover and Tabernacles, and Rosh Hashanah, like those are actually bigger than Jewish. Those are Israelite feasts. Those are biblical. Those are commanded things. But this was something that was experienced by the Jews, so meaning those from the southern kingdom. And I have to kind of make that point because Esther and Mordecai, who are the heroes of the story, they are not actually from the tribe of Judah. And yet, in the story, they are called Jews. They're actually both from the tribe of Benjamin.
Okay.
But in the story, they are called Jews. And that's because they're from the southern kingdom of Judah.
So would this, and correct me if I'm wrong, would this be classified more as like a cultural holiday then?
Yeah, it is a cultural holiday, I would say, but it definitely has religious undertones. Overtones, yeah. Religious theme. It's much like our Thanksgiving or Independence Day.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, those are those are religious holidays.
They absolutely are.
Yeah. So, but those are things that are not commanded in the scriptures necessarily. Now, the interesting thing though is even though Purim is not a commanded thing, it's not on the list of things in the Torah. There is a strong hint at it. So kind of like with Hanukkah, we talked about last time in Leviticus 23 has the list of all of the commanded feast days. And also Yom Kippur, which is not a feast day, it's a fast day. So those are all listed there in the order that they're celebrated. And then you go to Leviticus 24 and it says, keep the lamps burning all the time. So it's like there's kind of this hint at Hanukkah. Right. So the Torah has the hint about Purim as well. And I'm going to go to Numbers chapter 24, I think it is. Yes. Now, interesting thing is when Esther and Mordecai are living in Persia, they have Persian names. So it's kind of like Daniel, and Daniel's his Hebrew name,
right? And
his Persian, his Babylonian name was Belteshazzar. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those are all Babylonian names as well. It's Hananiah, I can't remember. Hananiah and Meshach. I can't remember the names of the three. Anyway,
it's all good.
Anyway, so they Esther and Mordecai, they have those are actually Persian names. So Esther's Hebrew name is Hadassah, which is mentioned in the text. Hadassah, which is the Hebrew word for myrtle tree.
Okay.
And but her Persian name Esther means star. So Esther is this is like the same as the origin of our word like astronomy or astrology.
Oh, okay.
Her name is Esther. Aster.
Okay.
So her name is a star. So anyway.
It's a lot to live up to.
That is, yeah, I guess you could think that. So in Numbers chapter 24, Numbers 24, first of all, this is where Balaam is being hired to attempt to curse Israel and just fails over and over, okay, and ends up blessing them. But in, let's see, verse 17, now this is usually taken to be a prophecy about the Messiah, and I think that it is. But just like the Messiah is, has foreshadowing by many of the prophets and other characters in the scriptures, this prophecy is fulfilled in both Esther and also the Messiah. So in verse 17 it says that in the future there shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter. So this is going to be royal. A royal star is going to come out of Jacob, out of Israel, and he shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. So it's talking about a battle. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remains in the city. And when he looketh on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. Okay, Amalek is also mentioned earlier, actually, in verse 7. He shall pour the water out of his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters, and his king, meaning Israel, shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. So Agag and Amalek, these actually are tie into the story of Esther as well. So let me, I guess I can talk about that right now. So one of the themes of the story of Esther is actually the redemption of King Saul. You remember Saul was Israel's first king.
Right.
Yeah, and he was also a Benjamite. Huh. Right. So here we have this first king of Israel, Benjamite, and then we have Esther and Mordecai. They are also Benjamites. And actually, interesting, if you go to Esther chapter, I think in chapter 2, let me see here. Oh, there you go. It mentions a partial genealogy of Mordecai. Okay, it is in 2. Oh, yeah, 2. Verse 5. Now in Shushan, which is the capital city, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So, interestingly, in Kish and Jair and Shimei, these are all relatives of Saul as well. And so by just with this little mention right here, there's a clue. Now there's a larger, like kind of an expanded canon, I would say, of the scriptures called the Targums. Have you heard of the Targums?
Mm-hmm. I have.
So basically, I like to think of the Targums as basically like the JST, like ancient JST. Okay. They're the scriptures with like added explanations and clarifications.
All right.
So in the Targum of Esther, it actually explicitly ties Mordecai to King Saul, like he's a direct descendant.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and Esther is as well, because they're cousins.
Right.
So, okay, now ultimately, King Saul fails, and the kingdom is taken from him. That's in 1 Samuel 15.
Right.
I won't go read it, but basically, Samuel tells him it's time to go after Agag. And Agag is the king of the Amalekites. And who are the Amalekites? Amalek, the original Amalek, is the grandson of Edom, or Esau.
Okay.
Okay, so all three of those names were mentioned in Numbers chapter 24 when it talks about a star will rise up with a scepter and will basically subdue Edom, Amalek, and Agag. So
okay.
So what happens is, well, first let's back up a little bit more. Why is Amalek a problem? Well, when the children of Israel come out of Egypt, and they're going through the wilderness, Amalek, the Amalekites, they actually kind of sneak up behind the Israelite camp and start like killing the stragglers, women and children and people who are lagging behind. And then this is where they have their big battle where, Moses goes up on the hill and he's got his arms held up, by Aaron and Hur.
Okay. Yeah.
Aaron and Hur, and Joshua is down there as the commander of the army. And eventually Amalek is defeated, but not entirely. They just defeat him in that one battle. So eventually they get established in the land. Saul is chosen to be king, and Samuel says it's time to go and take care of the Amalekites for what they did, and they're still, they still want to destroy Israel. So we're going to go take care of that. And Saul is told to spare nothing, right? He says, wipe out everything, man, woman, child, and even the cattle, sheep, cows, everything. And also all of their stuff, whatever treasure you may find, do not touch it. So Saul goes and carries out this mission, and then they're successful in the battle. Saul wins. Agag is the king of the Amalekites at this time, and so Samuel comes after the battle's over and says, "Oh, how did you do?" And Saul says, "Oh, we did excellently. We fulfilled the words of the Lord completely." And in the background, there's like this, and Samuel says, "What is the sound of all this cattle I hear? Why does the army have a bunch of cattle?" And Saul says, "Oh, well, we saved all those those are spoils." And Samuel's like, "You were told explicitly not to do that." And Samuel says, "Oh, well, but we're going to offer these as sacrifices to the Lord, so that ought to be pleasing to him." And this is the famous line where Samuel tells him, the Lord would rather have obedience than sacrifice.
Right.
And then Samuel's like, "Well," Saul's like, "Well, we also saved the king alive here too. Look, we got him right here. Here's Agag." And Samuel's like, "What are you doing?" And so no doubt when Saul started having success, and then they kind of fell upon the spoils, they let a bunch of Amalekites go because they had to round up the sheep and cows and stuff.
Right.
So Saul fails, and then Samuel tells him the kingdom is. He actually tears his cloak or whatever and says the kingdom is torn from you. And then, of course, David is anointed.
Can I ask you a question? And this may be off the subject a little bit, but I think it's worth exploring here. Oftentimes you hear critics of the Bible say things like, it's just brutal. There's, this. I don't see God in the Bible when you start talking about killing everybody.
Yeah.
Women, children. Yeah. What's your response to something like that?
You know what? Actually, it is a hard thing to kind of understand, especially with our modern sensibilities. I think because I think in those former ages, I think there's a lot more violent. The world was just a more violent place.
Oh, it was, yeah.
And we are very secure, and there's not bands of marauders and robbers coming to bands of robbers coming to steal the king's sheep and stuff all the time. people who don't think it's strange that people who carry a concealed weapon or something with them all the time,
Sure.
they think that's there's something wrong with these people, So it's difficult. I've talked to Mormons, who feel this way, like the God in the Old Testament is all vengeance and destruction, and the God in the New Testament's all lovey-dovey and stuff. And I'm like, well, in the Book of Mormon, God just like destroys like city after city, like after at Jesus' crucifixion, there's all the destruction. There's just all these wicked cities that are sunk and burned, and whirlwinds and earthquakes, and they're like, oh yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. So what do what's my answer to that? Ultimately, I think it's you have to realize how utterly depraved and wicked the people who are destroyed are. Same with the worldwide, the flood with Noah. The Canaanites in particular, right, which is what we're talking about here with the Amalekites too. They were committing on the regular every abominable, violent, depraved act that could be done. And God said their wickedness is full and overflowing. And so the land needs to be cleansed. And to be honest, I think I think ultimately it is it's a blessing actually to everyone, even those who were wiped out in the flood. It was probably better for them looking at it with eternal eyes.
Sure. Like,
just stop sinning. Let's have a reset here. Of course, in God, in reality, no one dies.
Right.
In a final sense, those people are all still alive.
I think the other thing is that I think what the Lord's trying to do here is prevent a blood feud from continuing on for generations and generations.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Let's finish this off. And people don't have to look that far back in history to see that that's not unreasonable. We helped the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and it still came back to bite us in the ass, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that, and you have to look at time frame. It's a different time, right?
Yeah.
You have child sacrifice everywhere.
Correct.
And
these people were burning their children alive.
Yep. And
these are the people that God says wipe out. So it's not like they're just a bunch of
exactly
innocent, righteous people.
Exactly.
These are people who just, without provocation, just came up behind Israel and started murdering the weak among them. So and that I believe, because I believe what the scriptures say, that the entire region of Canaan was full of people who were just cutthroat, bloodthirsty, violent, wicked to the max.
Yep. No, I agree totally.
And it's hard for us to comprehend, maybe,
a
society that wicked, but hang on for a decade or something.
Yeah, exactly. It is hard to recognize that, right? But because we have been the beneficiaries of a fairly robust society for the better part of 250 years now, especially within America.
Yeah.
And so to have that just pop out at you at the Bible, I can see where that might throw some folks, but it takes a little bit of, before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, let's look at everything around there. And it was a much more brutal time than what we're in now.
Absolutely. So that's the downfall of Saul. He hangs on as king for a while, until David is grown, and Saul is eventually killed in battle. Commits suicide, attempts to anyway, and but that was kind of the breaking point as far as the Lord was concerned. Like, that's it. Like, the kingdom is going to another line, and Saul's children are not going to be kings anymore. But in the story of Esther, we actually have Saul's descendants becoming royalty again.
A redemption.
It's a redemption of Saul and his line. Yep. So, and it happened actually in, we'll get to that. Let's go talk about the story a little more, I guess, a little more depth. So, so the story starts out, actually, this is another theme. This is another theme throughout the book is drunkenness. There's, I counted them before I came over here. There's like 6 huge drinking parties. Well, I don't know about huge drinking parties. There's 6 drinking parties of various sizes that are mentioned, and I think that's part of the analogy with the God being hidden, is also just that the people in the story are like kind of unaware. They're drunk, right, and they're just kind of oblivious to the meaning and the significance of the things that are happening around them. And that's, I think, part of the symbolic reason for including accounts of all these drinking parties. Yeah,
there's some, as a guy who used to drink a lot, there's some pretty strong analogies there, right? Because even when, look, if you're drinking on a regular basis, even when you're quote unquote sober, you're not really sober. Right, you're still kind of out of it. You're still
a little slow,
trying to gather your senses. So
a little foggy. Yep, a little foggy in the brain. So Ahasuerus, he becomes king, and like to celebrate, he throws a 6-month long drinking party for all the princes and nobles. Okay, and then when that's over, he throws another drinking party for everyone in Shushan, which is the capital city. All the people, everyone, rich and poor, come for a whole week, and just the wine is just poured out. People can drink as much as they want. No one's required to drink. It specifically says, like, people can just do whatever they want and just have a good time. So more than half a year, there's this drinking party. That's how Ahasuerus starts off his coronation or whatever. Right?
In my younger days, I would have been like 6 months, rookies.
So during this, he's had while he's having his feast and drinking party, he calls for his wife, Queen Vashti. Of course, she is the queen. Now, Ahasuerus, he has a harem as well, but he has one queen, who's Vashti, and she's reputed to be extremely beautiful, maybe the most beautiful, the fairest of them all. I don't know.
Right.
And so some of his princes and stuff, he's talking and bragging, and he says, "Call for Vashti. Tell her to come up here, so everyone." And he's drunk, right? I tell him to come up here so we can all look at her and see how beautiful she is.
I only laugh because this will tell you how flawed I was, and still am to a large degree, right? I'm not drinking anymore, but I can understand I just imagine like, see my wife, she's so hot, bring her up. Yeah, come here, honey.
So, of course, he sends messengers. Now, Vashti, she's having her own party with the women.
Okay.
And she's the great granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
So, I mean, she's from a royal family, and she's not drunk, I don't think. But they come and request her to come and show off her beauty, and she says, no, like, I'm not going down there to hang out with a bunch of drunkards, a bunch of drunk guys, yeah. And so the king is upset about this, and one of his counselors, who is Haman, it's a different name though, it's Memucan, but the Jewish tradition says this is Haman. He comes up with this idea. He says, get rid of Vashti and find someone better, someone who will respect the king, and write a law throughout your kingdom that all the wives have to respect their husbands. And he says, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So Vashti is...
probably why he was still drinking, too. That's a great idea.
Vashti is disposed of. It doesn't actually say there's a dispute among the rabbis, whether she was exiled or executed, even possibly. I tend to think executed.
Really?
And because of Esther's hesitation later on, like she had just seen what happens to even the queen if the king is displeased with her. So anyway, we'll get to that later. So they send out messengers throughout the kingdom to bring the eligible maidens to come and try out for the position of queen. Yeah, so. And if you don't get to be queen, you get to be in the royal harem. Which probably back then is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you're going to be financially taken care of at least. So Esther is chosen as one of the contestants, and Mordecai tells her to keep her Jewish identity secret. So she goes and is there's this very long process. It takes actually a whole year for them to purify themselves, and they get all these special baths and perfumes and everything for an entire year before they're ready to appear before the king. So, but she wins the king's heart over, becomes the new queen. And then the story also says that Mordecai basically has some kind of low-ranking position in the king's court. He's like a doorman or a gatekeeper or something like that. And so he goes to the palace every day and he hangs out at the gate. He doesn't go inside, but he kind of exchanges news and finds out how Esther's doing. And this is where the next secret thing is that Mordecai there as the gatekeeper, one time he's there and he overhears some people talking, around the corner or whatever. Two of the king's attendants, Bigsan and Teresh, they are planning to assassinate the king. And he overhears their plans. And then, interesting thing is this is a tricky situation here because you are lower. You're a low man on the totem pole.
Right.
And you find out that some of the king's attendants, so they're higher up than you, are planning on assassinating the king. How do you warn the king? Who do you tell? Because how do you know that the person that you tell isn't in on it?
Right.
And actually, that's interesting because the scriptures actually have another case of this. This was in 2 Kings. There's the Sennacherib, who's the king of Assyria. He was actually assassinated by his sons, and it mentions that in 2 Kings. But they found ancient Assyrian clay tablets that have more of the story, and there was one of the lower court members who found out about it and actually told his supervisor or whatever, hey, I know the king's sons are trying to kill him. And the supervisor took him in and they blindfolded him because no one's allowed, like commoners or lower people are not allowed to look directly upon the king. So even if you do get an audience with the king, you'll be blindfolded. Okay? So they bring him blindfolded before the king and says, tell us what you know. And he says, your sons are planning to kill you. And they take off his blindfold, and he was just confessing to the future assassins. Oh. Because the person that he entrusted was actually in on the plot, on the conspiracy. So, and then of course, then he was questioned, and then he and his household were executed. And then the assassination was carried out.
When people say capitalism is a cutthroat business, I'm like, you've never studied monarchies.
Yes, right. Yeah. Oh. So this is dangerous business, right? Mordecai finds out about this, and who can he tell? He said, I'll tell Esther. Because I have access to the queen, and I can trust that, and then she can tell the king. So he does that, and then Esther warns the king, And the two conspirators are caught and executed, and that seems to be the end of it. So it turned out well. Now, shortly after this, Haman, who's one of the kind of the nobles or princes in the kingdom, he gets chosen to be kind of the head of the nobles. He's kind of elevated to be the prime minister, like the second in command. Okay, and it's interesting. The scripture says that the king commanded that everyone bow down to Haman. But and of course, and the story goes that Mordecai refuses. And but it's interesting that Haman never doesn't do anything to Mordecai directly, which he would have authority to do if that really were the law. So the implication is that probably that was not actually what the king commanded, but Haman was just taking liberties and telling everyone that the king expected them to bow down. And it bothered him that when he made this decree that had no legally binding force, that people were disrespecting it. So I mean, you could make some he was you can make some inferences or some application to modern day things here too. When there's policies or decrees or executive orders that are made that are not actually laws, but people are punished or outcast or whatever for not bending to these illegal or even illegal orders. That's the situation that Mordecai was in. Now, he gives the reason why he doesn't bow to Haman is because, he says, it's because I'm a Jew. Now, this is kind of interesting because in the scriptures that Jews do bow to people. Okay, but interesting is that when it mentions Haman, it specifically mentions part of his genealogy as well, which is that he is a descendant from Agag. So here we have Mordecai, who's a descendant of Saul, and Haman, who's a descendant of Agag, who so there's some tension there,
friction.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So he's really mad about this, and every time he rides past Mordecai, who's the gatekeeper, so Mordecai is seeing him frequently. It's not just someone out in the marketplace or whatever. It's someone in the palace who is refusing to obey this order. And so he goes to the king and says, there is a group of people, and he keeps it secret. He doesn't say who the group of people is. But the king isn't really paying attention because they're actually drinking while they're doing this. Okay, so he's like, there's this group of people who are in your kingdom, and they do not obey the king's laws. He doesn't say what laws or what the specifics are. He says they don't obey your laws, and it will be good if we could get rid of them. And Haman says, I will even pay out of my own pocket the soldiers' salaries, or at least part of the soldiers' salaries, to take care of this problem. And the king's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Here, take my ring. Go ahead and write a law, and seal it with my signet. And so Haman does this, and here's where Purim comes in, because Haman knows that the Jews are God's people, and that he protects them, and so he wants to do everything right, and so he decides to basically cast lots, roll the dice to pick the right month and the right day to carry out the execution of the Jews. And the Jewish stories go. This doesn't say it in Esther, but the traditions are that he rolled the dice, and it fell on the day of Passover or whatever. He's like, no. That's, God saved them on that day, and he rolled the dice, and there's some other day that's special to the Jews, and he went through every month And there's just nothing was going to be quite right. He knew that those were blessed days, and he finally came to the 12th month and the 13th day of the 12th month. And I'm not sure, but I think this is probably part of the reason why 13 is considered an unlucky number. See, this is the day that was chosen by casting lots to destroy the Jews. And this is what the law that Haman wrote basically said: on the 13th of Adar, which is the 12th month, then everyone in the kingdom is authorized, and there was going to be soldiers officially as well, but everyone is authorized to kill their Jewish neighbors and take their stuff. All the wealth that the Jews might have can be yours. You can kill them without consequence. In fact, you're commanded to. And so that was the plan. And the plan, it goes out, and they send out runners. They post up notices all over the kingdom, right? And so there's sackcloth and ashes of the Jews are sad about this, and Esther finds out and wonders why Mordecai is so sad. He tells her, and also says to her, "You got to go before the king and tell him not to do this or try to stop this." And she responds, she's like, even though she's queen, she's like, I've not been called for in the last month. I haven't even seen the king in a month. And I can't just show up. If I show up and he's displeased with me for any reason, then
he's going to axe me.
Yeah, and we just saw what happened to Vashti, a couple of months ago or whatever it is, So, but Mordecai tells her, he's like, he says, if you don't step up, the Jews are going to be saved anyway. But you will bring disgrace upon yourself and your family, and you and your descendants will be destroyed. But the Jewish people, as a people, we are going to be saved anyway. And he also gives her the famous line, "Who knows that for all you know, you were brought into the kingdom, to this earth for this very reason. Like, this is your mission." And so that persuades Esther. And she tells everybody to fast. Everyone fasts for 3 days.
No, does the king know she's Jewish yet?
No, this is all still a secret. Okay. So at the end of 3 days, she gets all dressed up and makes an unannounced, uncalled for appearance in the courtroom, in the royal court, before the king, and he's just happy to see her. And he puts out his scepter towards her. She touches the top, and that's the signal that everything's good. And he asks her, "What do you want, my queen? Anything you ask for. Half my kingdom I'll give to you if you." And she says, "I just want you and Haman to come to a drinking party that I have planned later this evening." And he says, "Done. Wonderful, done.
Yeah,
Haman, let's go. Let's get ready, And so they go to the drinking party, and Haman is so excited about this because it's just the king and he are like the only ones invited by the queen to this party. And he's like, "This is awesome. Look, the king just elevated me, and now the queen is elevating me. And I have plans to get rid of all the Jews, which will get rid of my enemy Mordecai. And this will be so awesome." And so the king, Ahasuerus, he asks Esther, he's like, "Tell me what you want. Like, you don't want me to just come to the parties. Surely you must have something else that you want." And she says, "Yeah, I want you to come to another party tomorrow, and then I'll tell you." And he's like, "Okay, this is great." And Haman is overjoyed that he gets invited to a party, another drinking party, the next day with the queen and the king. This is great. And as he's leaving the party that evening, he passes by Mordecai, who does not bow to him. And he was on this high, this emotional high, and he says, all of all of the honors that have been given me by the king and the queen and my position, they all mean nothing to me as long as Mordecai is alive. Like I would rather have him dead than all the success in the world. That's what. Okay, so this is the spirit of Agag, right? And
I got to admit, I feel the same way about the Chicago Bears. So, I mean, I get it on some level.
He goes to his wife, Zeresh, and she says, just go. Like, you're being exalted right now. Like, the king supports you and honors you. The queen supports and honors you. Just go ask the king for permission to kill Mordecai. And he says, why didn't I think of that? This is a great idea. It's a great idea. So he said, so that night he has a gallows built in his courtyard of his house, like in his backyard. He has, or probably front yard. He has a gallows built 50 cubits high, it says.
He's going up front and center, up close and personal.
He's like, I am, and he's going to go tell the king, hey, I built the gallows already. I want to kill this guy. Will you give me permission? And so meanwhile, the king that night can't sleep. And he's tossing and turning. And finally, he brings his servant in and says, read to me from the Chronicles of the Kings of Persia. And and all of these things are by chance, right? By chance, this night, the king can't sleep. By chance, he decides, rather than counting sheep, I'm going to have someone read to me from the Chronicles. Should be boring enough that I could go to sleep. By chance, the book opens up to the place where it mentions how Mordecai saved his life from the assassination attempt. Oh. And the king says, keep reading. What did we do to honor Mordecai? And the servant says, nothing. We didn't do anything. And the king is just like, what? We didn't do anything for the guy who saved my life? How can that be? And right at this kind of moment of amazement, Haman comes like knocking at the door. Like he can't even wait till morning. And the king's like, who's out there? And it was Haman. And so he says, let Haman in. And he says to Haman, Haman, just the man I wanted to see. Tell me, what should the king do to honor, the man that he is pleased with? And Haman, in his mind, is like, who could the king be talking about except me? Yeah. And so Haman tells the king, okay, this is what you should do. You should take that man and put your royal robe on him, and put your crown on him, and put him on the king's horse, and have one of your most noble princes lead the horse through the streets of Shushan, the capital city, proclaiming, "Behold, everyone! This is what the king does to the man that he desires to honor." And the king says, "Haman, I want you to take the cloak and take the crown and do all those things that you just said to Mordecai." And it's like, like his world just shattered. You know?
Oh yeah.
And he goes home in defeat. And the next morning he gets up and does what the king commanded, and he puts the robe on Mordecai and the crown on Mordecai and puts him on the king's horse and walks out in front, proclaiming to everyone, this is the man that the king wants to honor, and this is how the king honors the man that he wants to honor. Now it's interesting, the rabbis say, and I like this, they say, although God is never mentioned explicitly, that if every time Esther uses the word king, if you think of the Lord God,
right,
then here's, this is the disguise that God is using. So here's Haman saying, this is actually the man that God wants to honor.
So I gotta tell you, I'm thoroughly enjoying this story more than any others, because one, it feels a little more, even though there's some serious intrigue at play, it feels a little more lighter, right? The other thing is
it is humorous.
Yeah,
I mean, it is so funny and dark and
There's like I'm thinking of all these characters, right? You got Mordecai, who's just a good guy, just trying to do what he's supposed to do. And then you have Esther, who is kind of the reluctant hero a little bit. Like, I don't want to go do this.
Yeah.
And then you got the king. And to me, he seems like a drunk frat boy more than anything else, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like every human foible wrapped up into one story. And it's you're right. It's almost comical. I mean, it is. It's almost Monty Python.
It's the funniest story in the scriptures.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, I could totally see guys played in like the Holy Grail, Monty Python, doing something like this. But
so he's totally deflated, and but he after he's done walking Mordecai through the streets, then he goes and gets ready for the second drinking party with the queen and the king. And so they have their party, and I'm sure there's just no joy in it for Haman whatsoever. And while he's sulking, the king says to Esther, "All right, give me your request." And she says, "I request my life and the life of my people." And he's like, "What are you talking about? Like, no one's going to touch you." And she says, and then she reveals, she says, "I'm a Jew, and there's a plot to destroy my people." And the king's like, "Who?" "Haman." And Haman's like, "What? The queen is a Jew? No, I didn't know, you know." And the king is so furious that he stands up and leaves the room just to regain his composure. And while the king's out, of course they're royalty, Persians, so they have the table there, and everyone's like on a couch or a bed, right? And everyone's reclining at the table, drinking and eating grapes and whatever they do. And Haman just runs over to the queen's couch or the queen's bed and is just pawing at her, pleading for his life, you know. At that moment, the king happens to come back in, and there's Haman on the bed with the queen, and he's like, "Whoa, oh, are you gonna force the queen, right? Right here in my house, you know, in my presence?" And he's like, "Guards, you know, get Haman." And then one of the guards is like, "Hey, king, look out the window over there. Do you see that gallows in Haman's yard?" That was what he was planning on asking you permission to kill Mordecai on that gallows. And the king's like, "Mordecai? Like the man I just honored?" And Haman's just speechless, and he says, "Take Haman and hang him on that." And then he brings in Mordecai and puts the robe and the crown on him, and basically says, "You will be my second in command." And so this is another theme of the book of Esther, is this reversal of, I mean, they change places. Haman was hung on the gallows that he had made for Mordecai, and Mordecai is elevated and actually takes Haman's place as the king's advisor, prime minister, whatever. And he takes the ring, you know, as they're taking Haman away to hang him, he takes the ring off his finger, the signet, and you know, later on he gives that to Mordecai's not there, but the next day, you know, he gives that to Mordecai. And so the king's like, "Okay, well, you know, I wasn't paying attention when Haman told me about this plan, and I didn't know what was going on. What do you want me to do?" And Esther and Mordecai are like, you need to save our people and write a law and reverse it. And he says, "I can't do that, you know, because once a law has been written, then it cannot be undone. But I'll give you my ring, and you can write a new law, whatever you can think of to help your people." And so what they decide to do is a new law that says that with royal approval, the Jews may defend themselves. Like, so it is perfectly legal for the Jews to defend themselves. and that the royal favor, or whatever you want to say, is with the Jews now.
Okay.
And then to show that this is the case, like Mordecai does go through the streets again with the king's robe and the crown, and he's second in command. And there's a lot. In Esther it says that a bunch of the people who were enemies, they start to have second thoughts about carrying out these plans because the tide has changed here. And a bunch of people who maybe were kind of just ambivalent actually join with the Jews and convert because now Judaism is favored. Yeah. So the 13th of Adar comes, and there's a big battle in the palace city, Shushan, and also in the larger empire. And basically the Jews are victorious on the 13th. And so on the 14th, people outside the capital city, they have a big party, to celebrate their deliverance. Inside the city, they fight for an additional day. So they fight on the 13th and they fight on the 14th, and then on the 15th, when they're in the city, they have a party. And so those 2 days, the 14th and the 15th, those are the days of Purim that they celebrate.
That's where the party aspect.
That's where the party comes from. Now, I'm going to read. So I'm going to mention a couple more. Of course, there's this theme of chance and coincidence, and with the Purim, which the lots, and the scriptures have a bunch of times when lots are cast too. It's actually interesting though. Like in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 33, it says, "The lot is cast in the lap, but the outcome is the Lord's." Basically, that's a paraphrase, but it's like lots are used to make decisions, and you have some control over the die or the straws or whatever it is you're doing, but the outcome the Lord will use. So there's a bunch of times in the scriptures when lots are used. Nephi and his brothers, they cast lots to decide who's going to go try to get the plates. And even though the first, Laman fails. Laman, yep. Laman fails, even though the lot was cast for him. I think that's actually shows God's hand. And then they all go together, right? And they all fail together. And so this is the oldest doesn't have a right to the plates, and as a group, they don't have a right to the plates. They are Nephi's.
Gotcha.
Of course, they cast lots to decide, the apostles decide who to replace Judas with, right? And they decide Matthias. Anyway, there's lots of other times, including the land. The land was supposed to be divided by casting lots. And we still call land lots, right?
Yep.
So that comes from that idea of Joshua was supposed to cast lots to decide where the tribes get their inheritances. So anyway, so that's one of the themes. Another one, as I mentioned, is this turning things upside down. And the scriptures are kind of full of this too, but this story just illustrates it so perfectly, about the weak things being made strong, strong things being made weak, valleys being exalted, mountains made low, first last and the last first. And so this happens. Now, the redemption of Saul, I'm going to mention that a little more too, because it's interesting that when the Jews defend themselves, on both those days, they fight on the 13th and they fight on the 14th, and it says specifically that the Jews did not touch any of the spoils.
Oh, harking back to Saul.
That's right.
And what was happening there.
Yep. So this is the redemption of Saul. It was the other way around. The law that Haman had written said, you can go kill your neighbors and take their goods. But when the Jews defended themselves, they didn't. They just left everything for whatever the whoever is supposed to inherit
Right.
the dead people's property. But this is like, again, the redemption of Saul by his descendant Mordecai, who wasn't the king, but symbolically he was the king, right?
Yeah,
because
he was paraded around,
wearing the crown, wearing the robes, on the king's horse, parading around. Here is the king essentially succeeding at the task, specifically against Agag, because remember Haman is the descendant of Agag,
right?
Succeeding against Agag, where his ancestor Saul had failed. And then the other, another really interesting thing about Purim is that it has some interesting ties to Yom Kippur.
Really?
So Yom Kippur, we've talked about it, is the highest, holiest day
right
in the calendar, right? This is the Day of Atonement. That's what Yom is day, Kippur is atonement or covering. If you go to Leviticus 20 or 23, like I mentioned before, that it has all the feasts, and when it talks about Yom Kippur there, though, it actually, the word is Yom Kippur, and that word is in other places, but in Leviticus 23, it actually says Yom HaKippurim. And yeah, it's if you read the word one way, Yom is day, and then Ha Kippurim means the day of coverings. It's actually plural, or atonements. Okay, the Day of Atonements. But you can actually break the phrase up in Hebrew a little different way, and you can say Yom Haki Purim, which means a day like Purim.
Oh.
So how is Yom Kippur like Purim? There's actually some very interesting parallels. Of course, there's these also big drastic differences too. So on Yom Kippur, the other days, Passover and Tabernacles and the Feast of Trumpets or Rosh Hashanah, those are days that are kind of mixtures of spiritual. There's spiritual things, but there's also physical things too, because it's a party,
right?
And you have a feast and you have friends over, but there's also prayers and recitations and meditation and all those things. Yom Kippur is kind of one extreme end of that, though, because there's nothing physical on that day.
Nothing to do.
There's no party. There's no feast.
You're just pulling for the priest to get his job done.
That's exactly right. You just pray and hope, and like it's all spiritual. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have Purim, which is actually all physical. Like it's just a party. People wear costumes. People act crazy. They sing songs and dance. People go out and visit their neighbors. They take food to everyone. They drink a lot, actually, and it's quite the opposite. So there's these like polar opposites there, and yet there's this. The rabbis see these 2 days as like opposite sides of the same coin.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and as a balance to each other.
I was going to say there's kind of a yin and yang thing going on.
Yeah, that's
there.
exactly right. And that salvation comes through both things, because there is this need that we have for atonement and forgiveness and for humility and reverence. But there's also a need for partying and having a good time and rejoicing and all that. And Purim just fills that beautifully. Yeah. And that salvation includes both those things, Now, another interesting thing is on the day of Yom Kippur, the high priest, first of all, everyone's fasting.
Right.
And they're fasting for the success of the high priest, because he's going to go in to the throne room. He's going to go into the Holy of Holies is, where the Ark of the Covenant is, which is God's throne. and appear before the king and ask for the salvation of his people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Do you see what Esther?
Yep.
So Esther fasts, and she goes in fasting and appears before the king and doesn't know whether she'll live or die. I mean, this is a threat that hangs over ancient Israel too. Like if the high priest goes in there and he's unworthy in some way, like God might just strike him down.
Right.
And it's kind of unknown. You don't know. Right. And so Esther doesn't know, like the high priest doesn't know. But she goes in fasting and is accepted, and the people are redeemed
right.
As a result. So the other thing is interesting is all the other festivals and holy days, none of them involve casting lots except Purim and Yom Kippur, because they actually cast lots on the two goats.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
is part of Yom Kippur, is casting lots.
Okay.
For the salvation. Now in the story of Esther, the lots are cast for their destruction, and then on Yom Kippur the lots are cast for their salvation. Right. But those are the only times when lots are cast in connection with a holiday. So there's this beautiful kind of connection there too. And the other interesting and kind of beautiful thing, this is kind of the last theme, and then I want to tell about some kind of modern fulfillments, I guess, of Purim. But another thing that's interesting about Purim, and this kind of goes back to the God is hidden kind of thing. When the children of Israel were at Mount Sinai, it was fearful. The mountain was on fire. There was smoke. There was the sound of the shofar. There was thunder and lightning. And God says, here's my commandments. Will you keep them? But it's the answer that they gave was, of course, yes. But you could argue that it was a little coerced.
Sure.
Because it's like, will you keep my commandments? If you say yes, you'll be my people. If you say no, this is your grave.
Right.
I will just destroy you right here. Yeah.
Right.
Like, oh, yes, we'll say yes. I think we'll say yes. And Moses, please go up and talk to him because we don't want to.
We don't want to see him right now.
This is too much, right? So, symbolically, like this is where God marries, becomes the husband of Israel. This is their contract, their ketubah. But on Purim, we have a choice made by the Jews to be God's people and to own their heritage, own their Jewishness without any coercion. In fact, God's not around.
Right.
God doesn't seem to be coming to save them. There's no prophet, there's no Moses, and the people probably could just keep their identities hidden and avoid trouble. Keep their nose down. Don't draw any attention to yourself. But even when God's not there, and at the Purim, they say, we are going to be there for God, even though He doesn't seem to be here for us. Right? We're going to be faithful anyway. So there's no coercion. So sometimes some commentators will say something like, this is like Sinai is where the marriage happened, but Purim is like where the romance began. Like where the Jews showed their love without any coercion, right? And just said, actually, I do choose you, even when
is awesome.
When nothing is going, there's not necessarily going to be any reward or punishment, but I just fully embrace my Israelite heritage, and I'm going to stand up for that, regardless.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah. Okay. So those are all the, many of the beautiful themes. Now, modern application to this. Okay. Actually, this goes to the Nazis. There's some real interesting things about Purim and the Nazis.
Really?
Because, of course, the Nazis have the same plan as Haman did. We want to exterminate
The Jews.
the Jewish race. Yeah. That was Haman's plan. That was Hitler's plan. Actually, Hitler one time said, "It is true we are barbarians. It is an honorable title to us. I am freeing humanity from a false vision called conscience and morality. The Jews have inflicted 2 wounds on mankind, circumcision on its body and conscience on its soul. The war for world domination will be fought entirely between us, the Germans and the Jews. All else is facade."
Ooh.
Right, and this is, this is the godlessness of socialism.
Yep.
And communism, right? And it bothers me sometimes when people say the Nazis were right wing, like they're socialists.
No, you know what? I just had a conversation with a woman that the podcast will come out next weekend, where we talked about this. I think it's because of we measure things differently here in America than in Europe. Yeah. Right? In America, we reset things back a little bit at the Constitutional Convention from complete anarchy to just this side of orderly. Yeah. And so when we look at right or left, it's a lot different than what Europe does, right? Europe is used to subjugation. They've been that way for centuries. So when you start talking about right and left in Europe, it's communism's on the left and fascism's on the right. So I don't think that those scales mean the same thing, right?
Yeah, I think I've never heard that explanation. I like that, though. Like when you're just used to subjugation.
Yeah.
And monarchy or whatever.
Fascism would be on the right of that because you can still own a business. You just have to work with the government, quid pro quo kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, right.
Communism's, federalizing the stuff. So as I've looked at it, I think it's a matter of scales. But
point of view. Where's your reference to measure from?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. I like that. Okay, well, so not only did Hitler want to exterminate the Jews, but also they wanted to plunder the Jews too, and they did. There was many Nazi officials that became wealthy from taking, plunder, spoils.
Yep.
So that just goes right along with Haman's plan too. Now it's interesting, and the Nazis were aware of this kind of Purim connection. Let's see. I got a little article here. I'm going to read some things here. This is from an article in the Torah, Torah.com. It's a website. It's got just
nice
Jewish articles. Anyway, it says the Nazis were well aware of the Jewish holidays and used Jewish festivals for particular savagery. These days had become known to the Jews as Goebbels' calendar, and many atrocities were committed specifically on Purim. So in Purim of 1942, I didn't mention this. I'm gonna before I read that, I actually need to mention one more thing in the Book of Esther. So Haman had 10 sons. Okay, 10. And they lived in Shushan, which is the capital city, and of course they were involved in the conspiracy of their father, right? So, this is Esther chapter 9 verse 12. After the first day of battle on the 13th, then Esther comes to the king. And the king says, tell me the news, let's talk about it. And, the king says, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? And now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted unto thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. So he's like, all right, you've had this success here. Tell me about what's going on out there. So they kind of exchange some news, and he says, what else do you want to have done? And then said Esther, this is verse 13, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows.
Ooh.
Now, this is interesting because in the verse before, he said, Haman's sons are destroyed.
Right.
But here, she says, how about tomorrow, meaning, literally meaning the 14th.
Right.
But this could be understood kind of prophetically as in the future. In the future, let us take Haman's 10 sons and hang them on the gallows. It actually gives a list of the 10 sons there earlier. So that's just an important point that I want to bring out. So in Purim of 1942, there was 10 Jews that were publicly hung by the Nazis, quote, in revenge for Haman. Okay. And then in the next year, Purim of 1943, the Nazis fooled some of the Jews in the Piotrkow ghetto by asking for 10 Jewish volunteers as part of an alleged exchange program for Germans living in Palestine. But when the 10 volunteers came forward, they were just shot. And again, they chose 10 because this was revenge for Haman, and they did it on Purim to avenge Haman's 10 sons. There was one particular guy, and I'm not a Holocaust scholar by any means, but anyway, so if these names sound familiar, you can tell me about them. But Julius Streicher, or Streicher, I don't know how to say it. Anyway, on the day after Kristallnacht, he wrote this article about the secret plans of the Jews related to the Jewish holiday of Purim, and how if the Germans did not wipe out the Jews, then the Jews are going to be celebrating another Purim.
Wow.
And so that was, so I'll just say Streicher. Hitler also, I read that there. Yep. In a radio broadcast in 1944, he stated that the Nazis were defeated. The Jews could celebrate the destruction of Europe in a second triumphant Purim festival. So, interesting thing, though, here is that after the war was done, Germany's defeated, the Nuremberg trials start.
Right.
And this is they're in 1946, if I remember right. And there's actually, let's see, there's actually 11, interesting. There's, let's see, there's 24 defendants tried at the Nuremberg trials. Started in 1945. Two of the 24 were acquitted, 8 were given prison sentences, and 12 were condemned to death. Of those, one of them, Martin Borroman, was tried in absentia. So I don't think they hadn't captured him, or maybe he'd already died, but they
tried him anyway.
Yeah. So that left 11. And one of them, Hermann Goering, he committed suicide before.
I knew Goering did, yeah.
Yep. So now, interesting. This is not mentioned in the Book of Esther, but in the Jewish traditions about this, they say that on the day that Haman was parading Mordecai through the town, that Haman's daughter saw Mordecai being paraded, and like from an upper story window, she like emptied a bedpan on the man who was leading Mordecai around, because she just wanted to disrespect whoever was respecting.
Right.
And then he looks up and she realizes that she just dumped the chamber pot on her dad, and realized that her dad was being humiliated by his enemy, and she commits suicide.
Oh wow. So
here's Goring.
Yep.
Goring. So he's kind of is represented by
His daughter.
The daughter, yeah. Which is interesting because Goring is known to have been a cross-dresser.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he's dressing in women's clothes, putting on makeup. He's got his nails painted, fingernails and toenails painted, dressing in effeminate clothes, changing his outfit all the time.
Yep.
And so Haman's daughter commits suicide before everything goes down and the 10 sons are hanged.
Wow.
And Goring, likewise, represents that. So now the other 10, they're convicted and sentenced, and they all ask to be shot because they're military men. They want to be tried by firing squad.
Right.
But the court says, no, we're not going to
honor you
with that way. We're going to hang you 10. And actually, the sentence is given in June of 45. And then there's all these appeals and stuff that goes until October 16th of 1946, which is interesting because that is the last day of Tabernacles.
Right.
And so another interesting thing is in the book of Esther. Now you can't see anything like it in the English, but in the Hebrew, in the list of Haman's 10 sons, there's 3 letters that are written very small for no apparent reason. And the letters are Tav, Shin, and Zayin. And in Hebrew, the letters are also numbers.
Right.
Kind of like Roman numerals are, right? So, but those letters actually add up to that is how if you're writing out numbers, you would write 5,707, which is the Jewish year that these 10 Nuremberg criminals were hung.
Holy cow!
Yeah,
that's nuts.
So
that's crazy.
It is crazy, isn't it? Now, and Joseph, was it Joseph? Julius Stryker, actually when he got up to the platform to be hung. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. At the bottom of the steps, he just suddenly blurted out, "Heil Hitler!" and shocked everyone. And then he gets up there and says, "Now I go to God." And they put the bag over him, and then suddenly he screams out again, "Purim, 1946."
Wow!
And so he recognized this obvious connection that was being played out. And then, of course, those 10 sons of Haman were all hung in 1946. In the year 5707. Yeah.
There are so many things about this story that jumps out to me, right, that are so applicable to our day. One is this idea of conspiracy, right? Everything's in the shadows. Everything is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, right.
I think we live in a time where that's... Look, we'll just go ahead and use what's his name? The guy who had the island. Epstein, right? He just magically winds up dead. Hangs himself with a paper sheet. Right? Likewise, we got all sorts of intrigue going on right now. Balloons flying overhead, right? All this stuff happening. At some point, God's promises are, I'm going to bring all this to light.
That's right. Yeah.
We're going to bring
all the hidden things.
All this stuff is going to come to this light.
Shouted from the rooftops.
And so I
thought, a microcosm of that.
Exactly. It's a microcosm of what I think we're going through now. And there's definitely parallels back in the Book of Mormon to the Gadian robbers.
Absolutely.
And that kind of intrigue. But it all is going to come out. The other thing that jumps out to me is that the Jewish people have suffered from ancient hatred, right?
Yes.
The hatred that seems to come around about once every 75 to 100 years for the Jews is just astounding, right? And it lasts. It never fully goes away. Mm-hmm. And I've always said, if you want to know where the world's at, look at how the Jewish people are being treated. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's a good barometer of where the world is as far as instability.
Yeah.
And it lasts. Case in point, Iran. Do you know what Iran means in Farsi?
I don't.
Oh, you're going to love this. So, and everyone, you can fact check me on this. I've double, triple, quadruple checked it. But just look it up. So, during World War II, or right before World War II, Iran was called Persia.
Right.
Okay? The Third Reich, officials from the Nazi Party make a journey out to Persia to try to solidify places for transport, because they're fighting a war in Africa and Saudi Arabia, and they want to have access. So they're going to go through Persia. They have a grand meeting. I mean, they're slapping backs. And he's like, you know what? You guys should change your name to Aryan. Double check it. Get your phone right now while we're on the air. And translate Iran. What does Iran mean in Farsi? And it's Aryan.
Wow.
It is craziness. And every time this happens, it lasts forever. It doesn't go away fully. Here it is, right here.
English.
What does Iran mean?
The land of Aryans. Oh, that's the Wikipedia article. That's amazing. Land of Aryans.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I knew that, that they were, that the Ottomans, I guess, sent plenty of soldiers to support the Nazi efforts.
Yeah. And so I only bring that up because you have to understand that the adversary's never done. And God made a promise to the Jewish people. And he keeps his promises. Mm. That's where the Savior came down through. Mm. And the adversary still bears that. And so if there's another thing we can take away from this story is that be on the lookout, right? When you start seeing these things come to pass and you start seeing more and more anti-Semitism, you can bet global unrest is at the door. Mm-hmm. Every time.
Yeah. I mean, that's, Israel is the centerpiece, right? The linchpin for the end days. Like
it's the flashpoint, right? It is absolutely where it all goes down, so to speak. So, but awesome.
Good stuff. Yeah. So we are having. So this year, Purim is going to be on the 7th and 8th of March, and which is in the middle of the week. So we're actually having a party on the 11th. So a couple of days later, but that'll be a Saturday. At 4 p.m. you can, the Zarahemla Foundation Facebook page should have information about it. But it's a costume party because of all the disguises and secret things, and also it'll be a potluck, and the potluck theme is foods that have hidden middles.
Okay.
So, peanut M&Ms or egg rolls, or chimichanga, something that's covered up. You can't see what's donuts on the inside. Jelly donuts, exactly. Yep. So you got the idea. Pizza rolls,
nice.
Pot stickers,
all
of that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Fudge dipped Oreos,
So what kind of costumes are people dressing up in?
Various.
Okay.
Various, I think. I mean, there's always quite a. Let me see. So last year, I'll tell you what my family did. So if I can remember all of them, I probably won't be able to remember all of them. But My son was dressed up as a grenade. He's a hand grenade.
Nice.
I was actually that was actually 2 years ago. Anyway, last year he was a Jedi. Okay. I like to do kind of punny things sometimes. So this was 2 years ago. I wore I cut out some like a fig leaf out of paper and made a little apron, and then I put on my chest some red and blue balloons, 2 of each, with like electric charges written on them. So it was like a helium nucleus. So, but I had the fig leaf, so I was a helium atom.
Nice.
You know?
Nice.
Anyway, dumb stuff like that. But
I was thinking about just putting on my suit and falling down and just pretend I'm Joe Biden. So.
It was either I can't remember now. My mother-in-law or father-in-law came a few years ago, and they had a cereal box on their back, but it was like all painted all black, and so they said they were a refrigerator magnet.
Nice.
So it looked like they just click them on there. Anyway, so a lot of them are just fun. People normally kind of avoid the Halloween type, and gore and goblins and vampires and stuff. Traditionally, a lot of in Jewish circles, they like encourage people to dress up as
good characters.
As like prophets or Esther or Mordecai, people from the story, things like that. So anyway, it's a fun time. We usually will dress up. We'll play dice games.
Cast lots.
Yes, exactly.
Nice.
So we'll play Bug and Yahtzee and 10,000 or Farkle or whatever, if you've played any of those games. And we'll also have like a melodramatic reading of the story of Esther. So we won't read. We can read kind of in a abbreviated version so the kids can follow along. But we read the story, and every time Haman is mentioned, then everyone boos and stamps their feet. And when Esther or Mordecai are mentioned, then everyone cheers and blows their noisemakers or whatever.
Nice.
And so that's fun. And eat our foods with hidden centers.
I like it.
So it's a fun time.
Awesome. All right. And when is that going to be again?
It's going to be March 11th. So that's Saturday.
Okay.
And 4 p.m. is when we're going to kind of gather. We usually gather and play games while food is preparing, and then.
Perfect. Well, I'll go ahead and mention that too a bunch until then, and we'll.
Okay.
Sounds good. Some support. Dude, it's always fun when you come over.
Yeah. It's a pleasure.
I love having you here. So, all right. Next one's
going to be Passover. Yeah, Passover and unleavened bread.
Awesome. I can't wait for that one. That one's going to be epic.
That one will be a big one.
All right, everyone. Bye.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.